The rain poured heavily over the streets of Lagos, the sound of it tapping on the windshield like 1,000 whispers. Amora Okafor sat in the back of her luxury car, staring out at the chaos unfolding around her. The traffic on the third mainland bridge had come to a halt, as usual, in the middle of the downpour. She could see the water rising on the sidewalks and hear the honking horns from every direction. But Amora wasn't paying attention to any of that. Amora, a reclusive billionaire widow, had never been one for the public spotlight. It was almost a year since her beloved husband, Chijioke, had passed away, and she had retreated from the world. The mansion she called home on Victoria Island had become her sanctuary, a place of solace and reflection. The last few months had been difficult, facing the reality of being alone, of having a legacy that felt empty without Chijioke beside her. They had built everything together, the sprawling estate, the businesses, the power in Lagos society. But now, with him gone, it all seemed pointless. Her mind wandered to those late-night conversations she used to have with Chijioke, his infectious laugh echoing in her thoughts. He had been so full of life, with an enthusiasm that often made her forget the weight of the world outside. Now it was just her, surrounded by the silence of her empty house, the only company, the memories that haunted her every moment. The car jerked forward slightly, the traffic inching along at a snail's pace. Amora looked up from her thoughts and glanced out the window, momentarily distracted by the sight of a young boy standing by the roadside. He was huddled under a torn umbrella, his thin frame almost invisible against the grey backdrop of the rainstorm. But what caught her attention, what made her pause, were the two babies in his arms. Amora's heart skipped a beat. The babies, twins, were wrapped in tattered cloths, their frail little bodies shivering violently from the cold. And their eyes, those strange, beautiful hazel eyes, were exactly like Chijioke's. The boy, no older than 12 or 13, stood in the rain, begging passers-by for help. His expression was desperate, his face a mixture of fear and exhaustion. But it was the twins that captured Amora's heart. She felt an unexplainable connection to them, as if they were somehow tied to her late husband. Without thinking, Amora tapped on the window, signaling her driver to stop. "Stop the car," she commanded. The driver, startled by her sudden request, glanced at her through the rear-view mirror. "Ma'am, the rain is really heavy, and there's nowhere to park." "Stop the car," Amora repeated, her tone firmer this time. The car came to a halt, and Amora quickly opened the door before her driver could protest. She stepped into the rain, her elegant heels sinking into the flooded pavement. The cold water seeped through her clothes, but she barely noticed. Her eyes were locked on the boy and the babies, and her heart ached in a way she hadn't felt in years. The boy's head snapped up as he saw her approach, his eyes wide with a mix of surprise and caution. He looked like he hadn't seen a woman like Amora before, wealthy, well-dressed, and out of place in the slums of Lagos. "Please, madam," the boy called out, his voice cracking, "can you spare something for the children? They are hungry, and they need warmth." Amora knelt down in front of him, careful not to get her dress too dirty. She reached out to touch the babies, their small, fragile bodies trembling in her arms. "Where did you find them?" Amora asked softly, her voice laced with concern. The boy hesitated before answering, his eyes darting from her to the twins. "They are my sisters. I'm their brother, Emeka, their mother. She died when they were born. I've been taking care of them since." The revelation hit Amora like a wave. She could feel the boy's pain, the weight of responsibility he had carried at such a young age. "Where is your father?" Amora asked, but Emeka shook his head, his eyes glistening with unshed tears. "I don't know, madam. He used to visit sometimes, but he's gone now. It's just me and them." The rain continued to pour down relentlessly, and Amora felt a surge of emotion for the boy and his sisters. She couldn't imagine what it would be like to be so young and forced to take on such a burden. Her own heart, which had been closed off to the world after Chijioke's death, seemed to crack open in that moment. Without thinking, Amora stood up and turned to her driver. "Take them to my house, now." The driver's eyes widened in disbelief. "Madam, are you sure? They're strangers. It's dangerous out here and—" "I said take them to my house," Amora interrupted, her voice leaving no room for argument. Her driver didn't hesitate again, and he quickly opened the back door of the car to allow Emeka and the twins inside. As Amora climbed back into the car, she couldn't help but glance at Emeka, who was now sitting beside her, holding the babies close. As they drove through the flooded streets of Lagos, Amora's mind raced. There was something about Emeka and the twins, something familiar, something she couldn't put her finger on. Why did the babies have Chijioke's eyes? How could that be? Was there a connection, or was it simply a coincidence? She shook her head, dismissing the thought. She wasn't about to jump to conclusions, not just yet. But she knew one thing for sure. Whatever it was that had brought Emeka and the twins into her life, she wouldn't turn her back on them. The mansion loomed ahead as the car finally reached its destination. Amora's heart ached as she thought of the empty halls inside, empty without Chijioke, empty without anyone to share it with. But now, as she looked at Emeka and the twins, she realized she wasn't alone. And somehow, in some inexplicable way, they were meant to be there. The mansion was quiet, eerily so, considering the events that had just transpired. Amora stood at the grand staircase of her home, watching Emeka settle the twins in a guest bedroom, their tiny bodies wrapped in warm blankets. Their breathing still shallow from the cold. She could hear the soft sounds of the twins' murmurs, but it was the silence between her and the boy that weighed heavily on her chest. The house had never felt this alive, yet here she was, staring at the two tiny souls who had somehow found their way into her life. It was as though the universe had conspired to bring them here. But why? She paced the living room, her mind whirling. There was no logical explanation for why the baby's eyes, those hauntingly familiar hazel eyes, looked exactly like Chijioke's. It could have been a coincidence, but Amora wasn't sure she believed in coincidences anymore. After Chijioke's death, she had closed herself off from the world. Grief had become her constant companion, and she'd surrounded herself with people who couldn't ask the questions that lingered in the corners of her mind. Now, standing in her own home with the twins and their older brother, it felt as though fate had brought her back to the questions she'd buried deep inside her heart. She needed answers. As the night dragged on, Amora made her way into her study, her sanctuary where only Chijioke's personal things remained untouched. She moved past the neatly arranged bookshelves, where her husband had once kept his most prized books. The leather-bound journals, the framed photographs, and the papers, so many papers, stayed in place. The air in the room felt dense, heavy with memories. Amora turned to the desk, where she knew Chijioke kept his private letters, the ones she had never dared open. She paused for a moment, her fingers brushing the stack of papers before her. Her heart beat faster, but she steadied her hand and began to sift through the stack. There, in the midst of neatly folded paper, she found the letters, old and yellowed with age. They were from a woman named Adana. Adana, Amora whispered to herself. The name rang in her ears, like a bell tolling in a distant place. The letters were full of affection, longing, and intimacy. Things Amora never thought she would find when she opened the drawers in this room. There was no mention of her, the woman who had been by Chijioke's side for years, his wife, his confidant, the one who knew every part of him. But here, on these pages, he had shared his heart with someone else, someone named Adana. Amora's breath hitched in her throat. The details were clear now. Adana had been more than just a lover. She had been a significant part of Chijioke's life, and in one of the letters there was a cryptic line that sent a chill through Amora's veins. I see his eyes in our children. I will never leave them, even when he's gone. Our children. She had to know the truth. She had to. Amora's heart pounded as she grabbed her phone, dialing the number of the family lawyer, Mr. Okafor. The words left her lips in a blur, urgent and full of fear. I need a DNA test. I need it now. The twins. They're Chijioke's children. It felt as though the floor beneath her was shifting, like a deep and hidden truth was clawing its way to the surface. Minutes later, Mr. Okafor arrived at the mansion, his face pale with concern as Amora explained the situation. He listened quietly as Amora recounted the strange encounter with Emeka and the twins, his quiet expression slowly turning into one of disbelief as she showed him the letters. Are you sure, madam? He asked, his voice steady but filled with caution. This is a lot to take in. I'm sure, Amora replied. I saw it in their eyes. I felt it in my heart. They're his children, and Emeka is Chijioke's son. After a brief pause, Mr. Okafor nodded slowly, understanding the gravity of what Amora had just discovered. He agreed to arrange for the DNA test immediately, though his face held an unreadable expression. The situation was a legal nightmare, but he couldn't deny the truth that was unfolding in front of him. As he left to begin the arrangements, Amora felt a cold shiver crawl up her spine. What would the test reveal? And if the twins were indeed Chijioke's children, what did it mean for her? What did it mean for their legacy? Her mind wandered back to Emeka, the boy she had taken in so carelessly, so trustingly. How had he come to be in that position? How had he been living on the streets with those babies for so long? Amora couldn't imagine the kind of hardship they had faced. He had been abandoned by the world, just as she had been, except he had no one to grieve his loss with. As the night stretched into the early hours of the morning, Amora's mind was full of questions. How would she ever reconcile her love for Chijioke, the man she thought she knew, with the reality of his secret life? And what about the babies? What would become of them now? The DNA results would take time, but Amora wasn't sure how much more of this emotional roller coaster she could take. Her heart was torn between anger and compassion, between betrayal and the undeniable pull of family. As she stood there, staring out at the rain that still fell relentlessly over Lagos, Amora knew that her life was never going to be the same. The truth, no matter how painful, was waiting to surface, and she had no choice but to face it head-on. The air in the mansion was thick with tension as Amora stood in front of the windows, staring at the rain-soaked city of Lagos. It had been days since she had called for the DNA test, and the uncertainty gnawed at her. Every time the phone rang, her heart skipped a beat, only to sink when it wasn't the call she was waiting for. The answers, the truth were just out of her reach, but they were all she could think about. In the meantime, Emeka had settled into his new life at the mansion, though he remained distant and silent, clearly still overwhelmed by everything that had transpired. The twins, though safe and warm in their new surroundings, were not yet well enough to fully comprehend the changes happening in their lives. Amora's heart went out to them, but it was Emeka who troubled her the most. His stoic silence was both a shield and a barrier. He was not a child anymore. He had been thrust into the role of a guardian long before he should have, and that burden was written all over his face. Amora watched him from the hallway as he sat in the corner of the living room, quietly rocking one of the twins in his arms. He had a softness in him, despite the hardness life had forced upon him. But he kept to himself, as though he didn't believe he had a place in her world that was so far removed from the streets he had come from. Amora couldn't fault him for that. Still, the silence between them grew like a chasm. "Emeka," Amora called out gently, stepping into the room. He looked up at her, his eyes wary, his face unreadable. "Yes, Mom." "Come," she said, her voice a little more firm this time. "Sit with me for a moment. We need to talk." He hesitated before he slowly got to his feet, carefully placing the twin down in her crib. The baby stirred slightly but didn't wake. Emeka followed her into the study, where Amora usually spent her time working, though right now it felt more like a prison than a place of solace. The weight of everything that had happened sat heavily on her shoulders. They sat down at opposite ends of the desk, and for a moment neither spoke. Amora clasped her hands together, her gaze fixed on him. "You're not alone anymore, Emeka. You don't have to do this by yourself." He looked away, staring at the floor. "I've always done things alone, madam. I'm used to it." Amora felt her chest tighten at his words. How had this boy, this young man, become so hardened? Was it truly just survival that had shaped him, or was there something deeper, something in his heart that was still raw from the years of neglect and abandonment? The boy who had stood in the rain with 2 babies in his arms was not the same boy who sat before her now. He had been forced to grow up far too quickly. "But Emeka," Amora said softly, "you don't have to carry this alone anymore. You have us now. You have me." He stiffened at her words, and for a moment Amora thought he might leave the room. His hands gripped the edge of the desk, his knuckles turning white. Finally, he looked back at her, his eyes filled with a mixture of defiance and confusion. I don't need your pity, madam. You don't understand what it's like, Emeka said, his voice raw with emotion. I've lived my life on the streets. I've been the one to take care of them. He motioned toward the twins' room. They're my responsibility, not yours. Amora's heart ached as she listened to him, the layers of his pain peeling away with each word. He was right. She didn't know what it was like to be in his shoes, to have the world on his shoulders at such a young age. She couldn't even imagine the things he had endured, the struggles he had faced just to survive. She had everything: wealth, security, comfort. What had she truly known of hardship? No one is asking you to stop caring for them, Emeka, she said quietly, trying to soften her tone. But you don't have to do it alone anymore. I can help you. We can help you. He looked at her, but his gaze was sharp, as though he were trying to assess her sincerity. What do you expect from me, madam? I don't belong here. I don't belong in your world. Amora leaned forward, her eyes locking onto his. You belong here because you are family now, and that's more than just blood, Emeka. It's about what we share, what we fight for, and I'm not going to leave you or the twins to face this alone. There was a long silence between them, broken only by the soft ticking of a clock on the wall. Emeka's jaw clenched, and for a moment Amora saw the vulnerability in him, the fear he was trying to bury beneath his pride. I don't know what to do, madam, he said, his voice small now, almost defeated. I don't know how to be part of your world. Amora's heart broke at the rawness in his voice. You don't have to know everything right now, but I need you to trust me, Emeka. We'll figure this out together. He stared at her for a long time before finally nodding slowly. His expression was still guarded, but something in his eyes softened. A flicker of hope, perhaps, or the realization that maybe, just maybe, he wasn't entirely alone anymore. The moment felt fragile, like a delicate thread that could snap at any second. Amora knew this wasn't the end of Emeka's resistance. He was too proud to accept help easily, too scarred by his past. But it was a beginning, and for now, that was enough. The next few days in the Okafor mansion passed in a quiet tension. Amora had made it clear that she was committed to taking care of Emeka and the twins, but she could feel the strain in every interaction with the young boy. His resistance wasn't just to her help, it was to the very idea of belonging. He fought it with every breath, his pride and fear wrapped tightly around him like a shield he refused to drop. Yet despite his reluctance, there was no denying that the mansion was now his home, at least for the time being. The twins, though still frail, were slowly recovering under the watchful eyes of the doctors Amora had brought in. They were eating, growing stronger by the day, and Emeka, despite his hesitations, stayed by their side constantly, as though he couldn't bear to leave them for even a moment. One morning, as Amora descended the staircase to begin her usual routine, she noticed Emeka sitting in the living room with the twins in his arms. The storm outside had worsened, and the rain pounded relentlessly against the windows. Emeka looked tired, his eyes red from a sleepless night spent caring for the babies. She paused at the bottom of the staircase, watching him for a moment. There was a strange comfort in seeing him like this, vulnerable, human, unguarded. Amora felt a pang of guilt in her chest. She had promised him that they would be a family, but she knew she hadn't fully earned his trust yet. He had lived his entire life on his own. What did she really know about how to help him? Without thinking, she walked over to him, her footsteps soft against the marble floor. Emeka, she began, her voice gentle. You haven't had any rest, have you? Emeka glanced up, startled, before looking back down at the twins in his arms. I'm fine, he muttered, though it was clear he wasn't. Amora sat down beside him, her eyes scanning the room. The mansion felt quieter than usual, like the storm outside had somehow seeped into the walls. You need rest, Emeka. And the babies need more than just physical care. They need emotional security too. I don't think you can do this all on your own. Emeka stiffened but didn't look at her. His voice, when it came, was low. I don't have anyone else. Madam, no one else to turn to. I can't just let go. Amora's heart broke at his words. He had been carrying so much for so long, and now that he had somewhere safe to be, he couldn't let go of the weight. She could see that now, the burden that he carried wasn't just physical. It was emotional too. He had been abandoned by everyone but his sisters, and now, with her offer to help, he didn't know how to trust it. "I know you don't have anyone else, Emeka," Amora said softly, her voice full of empathy. "But that's why I'm here. You're not alone anymore. And the twins, they're not just your responsibility. They're mine too." He didn't respond right away. Instead, he stared down at the twins, the flickering candlelight casting shadows on his face. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Emeka sighed, a long, tired sound that spoke volumes about the pain he carried inside. "I don't know how to trust you, madam. I've been hurt too many times, and I don't want to bring you into this mess of my life. I don't want to be a burden to you." Amora reached out, gently placing her hand over his. His skin was cold, rough from the hardships he had endured. "Emeka, you're not a burden," she said firmly, "but I can't help you if you don't let me. You don't have to do this alone anymore." Emeka's eyes lifted to meet hers, but they were filled with skepticism. "And what about Chijioke?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "What about your husband? He wasn't the man you thought he was he?" The question struck her like a sharp blade. Amora swallowed hard, trying to push past the familiar sting of betrayal. It was the question she had avoided asking herself for days. What was Chijioke's involvement in all of this? What had he really done, and why had he kept it from her? She had never imagined the man she loved, the man she had built her life with, could have kept such a deep secret. But she couldn't let herself fall apart. Not now, not when Emeka and the twins needed her. "He was a man, Emeka," she said quietly, her voice steady despite the emotions swirling inside her. "A man with flaws just like everyone else. I loved him and I trusted him. But I also know that love doesn't make everything perfect. The truth, it's painful. But it doesn't change the fact that I want to help you. I want to help you and the twins." Emeka was silent for a moment, his gaze fixed on the twins as he rocked them gently in his arms. Amora could see the battle waging inside him, the internal struggle between trust and fear. She didn't expect him to let go of his walls immediately. It would take time. But she knew one thing for sure: he needed to feel safe. "You don't have to be afraid anymore," Amora continued, her voice soft but resolute. "We'll figure this out together. The twins will have a family, and so will you." Emeka finally looked at her again, his expression conflicted, but softer than before. For the first time, Amora saw a glimmer of something in his eyes. Maybe hope, maybe just a crack in the walls he had built around himself. He stood up slowly, carefully cradling the twins in his arms. "Thank you, madam," he said quietly. His voice was filled with reluctance, but also a quiet acceptance. "I'll try. I will try to trust you." Amora watched him leave the room, the twins nestled in his arms, and she felt a shift inside her. It wasn't much, but it was a beginning. It was the first real step towards breaking down the walls that Emeka had built around his heart. And for the first time in a long time, Amora believed that maybe, just maybe, they could find their way through the storm together. The days that followed were filled with an uncomfortable silence between Amora and Emeka. But that silence, though thick, was not entirely empty. There was a palpable shift, a sense that something was beginning to change. Amora could feel it, though she didn't know exactly what it was. Maybe it was the weight of the truth slowly sinking in. Or perhaps it was the lingering uncertainty that haunted Emeka and made him withdraw into himself more often than not. The twins, though still recovering from their ordeal, had settled into a new routine. Amora made sure to hire a full-time nurse to care for them, but Emeka, always present, took the most responsibility for their well-being. He still slept beside them every night, and his protective instinct never wavered. Amora watched him carefully, noting how he seemed to feel the weight of the world on his shoulders every time he looked at the babies. Though she had promised herself to give Emeka space, to let him figure things out on his own, she couldn't ignore the tug in her heart when she saw the way he shouldered his burdens. She had given him a home, a place to belong, but the emotional scars, the trauma of his years on the streets, weren't something that could be healed overnight. One afternoon, as Amora was walking through the hallway toward her office, she heard the soft sound of Emeka's voice, carrying through the slightly open door to the study. It was low, a quiet murmur, but it was enough to capture her attention. Curiosity tugged at her, and without thinking, she stepped closer to the door. At first, she wasn't sure if she should interrupt, if she should let him have this moment alone. But something about the tone of his voice, the way he seemed to be speaking to the twins, made her pause. It wasn't like the usual guardedness. This was different. She gently pushed the door open just a crack, enough to peer inside without being noticed. Emeka was sitting at the desk, his back to her, a few old photos scattered in front of him. The twins were in their cribs, sleeping soundly. He was flipping through the photographs slowly, his fingers lingering on each image as if memorizing the faces frozen in time. Amora's heart ached. She stepped into the room quietly, not wanting to disturb him. "Emeka," she said softly, her voice barely louder than a whisper. He didn't startle, but there was a slight shift in his posture as he turned to face her, the familiar defensiveness in his eyes. "Madam," he said, his tone strained but not unkind. "What are you looking at?" Amora asked, her voice gentle. She stepped closer, her gaze flicking to the photographs. They were old, worn at the edges. The faces in them were unfamiliar to her, though she could see that one in particular seemed to hold Emeka's attention. A woman, young and beautiful, holding a baby. Emeka swallowed hard, his voice low and thick with emotion. It's my mother, Adana. She used to hold me like that when I was a baby. She would sing to me at night, before everything changed." Amora's breath caught in her throat. She hadn't known Emeka's mother's name, hadn't known there was anyone else in his life before Chijioke's secrets came to light. She moved closer, her eyes fixed on the photo. "Where is she now?" Amora asked, her voice soft, as though speaking too loudly might shatter something fragile. Emeka hesitated, his gaze fixed on the photo. She died 2 years ago, when the twins were born." His voice trembled slightly as he spoke, though he quickly masked it with a stiff cough. She was weak. The birth, it took everything from her. A painful silence settled between them, and for a moment Amora wondered if Emeka would say more. But he didn't. He continued staring at the photograph, the edges of his mouth tight, his emotions tangled in a knot he couldn't undo. Amora knew there was more he needed to say, more of his past that he had locked away. She couldn't push him, not yet. But she knew that if they were ever going to be a family, if they were ever going to break through the wall he had built around himself, he had to share his truth. "Do you want to talk about her?" Amora asked gently, kneeling beside him. "I know it's hard, but I'm here. You don't have to keep it all to yourself." Emeka was silent for a moment, his eyes never leaving the photograph. "I don't know how to talk about her. I don't know how to explain what it was like, growing up without her. After she died, I was left alone with the twins. We didn't have anyone else. I had to grow up fast." His voice cracked at the last words, the weight of his childhood hanging heavy in the air between them. Amora could see the pain in his eyes, the rawness of a boy forced to become a man before his time. "You've had to be so strong," she said softly, her heart breaking for him. "But you don't have to be strong alone anymore, Emeka. You don't have to carry this weight by yourself." He looked at her then, his eyes wide with disbelief, as if he couldn't fathom the idea that someone would want to carry his burdens. "But I've always been alone, madam. I don't know how to trust anyone." Amora reached out, placing her hand on his shoulder gently. "You don't have to know everything right now. Just let me help you. Let me help you with the twins. Let me help you heal." For a moment, Emeka didn't respond. His eyes were still fixed on the photo, but there was a shift in him, something that was slowly breaking open. The walls he had built around his heart were starting to crumble, bit by bit. And for the first time, Amora saw a flicker of hope in his eyes. "Adana," he said quietly, his voice barely above a whisper, "she always told me that things would get better, that I'd find peace someday." He paused, his eyes welling with emotion. "I don't know if I believe it, but I want to try." Amora squeezed his shoulder, offering a comforting smile. "Then we'll try together. You're not alone, Emeka. You never have to be alone again." The days had softened, the weight of silence beginning to lift, as Amora and Emeka began to settle into an uneasy but fragile rhythm. Amora had promised herself that she would let Emeka take the lead. give him the space he needed to heal and adjust to his new reality. But day by day, something was changing. Slowly, without either of them realizing it, a connection was forming between them. Emeka had always been reserved, his walls impenetrable, but now there were moments where his defenses slipped. He started to talk to her more openly, though still guarded. When Amora asked about the twins, he would answer her with less hesitation. He no longer looked at her with suspicion or disbelief, but with something softer, something closer to trust, even if it was still a fragile thing. There were small moments too, when he'd glance at her as they shared a meal, or when they'd both sit beside the twins as they slept. In these moments, Amora saw the boy inside the man, vulnerable, tender, and lost. And in return, Emeka saw something in her that he hadn't expected. Kindness without ulterior motives. One evening, as the sun began to set and the golden hues of twilight washed over the mansion, Amora found herself sitting on the back porch, looking out at the lush garden that stretched out before her. It was a peaceful evening, the kind that felt like a brief reprieve from the world. She hadn't expected such a moment to come into her life again. Certainly not after Chijioke's death, nor after the discovery of his secret family. But here she was, sitting in the quiet with Emeka and the twins. The rain had stopped, leaving the air fresh and cool, with the earthy smell of damp soil lingering. It was moments like these that reminded her that life, despite its chaos and confusion, could still offer a form of peace. Emeka joined her on the porch, carrying the twins in his arms. He had begun to take to the new routine Amora had set in place, feeding them, caring for them, but most importantly, staying close. There was a small shift in him now, something warmer than before. He no longer held the twins with the same distance he had in those early days. He seemed to be learning how to enjoy the moments with them. "Isn't it beautiful out here?" Amora asked, looking up at the sky. "I don't think I've ever really taken the time to enjoy it." Emeka sat beside her, carefully laying the twins down on the cushion between them. He looked at her, then at the view, his expression softening for the first time in days. "I've never had anything like this. A place to be, to feel safe." Amora turned to look at him, her heart aching at the vulnerability in his voice. She wanted to say something to make him feel better, to ease the heaviness that seemed to weigh on his chest. But she didn't have the right words. Instead, she simply nodded and placed her hand on his arm. A gesture of comfort, one she hoped he could understand. "I know," she said quietly, "but you do now. And you don't have to face it alone." He looked at her then, his gaze lingering a little longer than usual. There was a subtle change in his eyes, a flicker of understanding, of something softer than the anger and pain he had carried for so long. "I don't know how to accept it, you know," he confessed. "I've been on my own for so long, I don't know what it's like to belong to someone." Amora smiled gently, squeezing his arm. "It's not easy. And I won't lie to you, Emeka, it won't happen overnight. But you don't have to have all the answers right now. Just take it one day at a time." There was silence between them, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It was the kind of silence that felt safe, like they had both finally found a way to simply be. The twins stirred in their sleep, and Emeka gently adjusted them, ensuring they were still comfortable. His actions were soft, tender, a stark contrast to the harshness he had worn like armor just days ago. "Thank you," he said quietly after a long pause. Amora looked at him, confused. "For what?" "For letting me stay here, for helping me with the twins, for giving us a chance." Her heart swelled and she placed a hand on his shoulder. "You don't need to thank me, Emeka. You're family, and family doesn't need to say thank you." Emeka's lips twitched slightly, as though he was trying to smile but didn't know how. It was the first real smile she had seen from him, and though it was small, it was genuine. Maybe I'm starting to believe that. Amora felt a warmth spread through her chest at his words. This was the moment she had been hoping for. The moment when all the walls he had built around himself began to crack, bit by bit. She had been patient, had given him space to heal, but now he was beginning to let her in. Emeka wasn't just a boy she had taken in out of charity. He was a person with a past, a family, and a future. And she knew in her heart that no matter the challenges they would face them together. They had already started to form something real, a connection born out of vulnerability, trust, and love. As the evening wore on, they sat in comfortable silence, watching the stars appear in the darkening sky. It felt like a new beginning for both of them, an opportunity to build something, not just for themselves, but for the twins as well. Emeka had started to open his heart, and Amora had learned how to give him space while still offering her support. For the first time in months, Amora allowed herself to feel hopeful again. The storm may have come, but it was slowly passing, and the promise of a new day, of new possibilities, was beginning to shine through. The storm had passed, but the skies in Amora's life had darkened once again. What had begun as a fragile connection with Emeka, one born of shared pain and understanding, was on the verge of breaking. The events of the past few weeks had led Amora to believe that the hardest days were behind her, that somehow things could be different now. She had begun to imagine a life with Emeka and the twins as her family, even started to dream of a future where they could heal together. But as often happens in life, the universe had other plans. The day the DNA test results arrived, Amora was prepared to face whatever truths awaited her. The phone call from Mr. Okafor came in the morning, the lawyer's voice calm but carrying an undercurrent of seriousness that made her stomach churn. "Madam, the results are in. I believe you should come to my office to review them personally." Amora, unable to shake off the sense of dread building inside her, agreed to meet him later that afternoon. She had been waiting for this moment, yet now that it was here, she could feel the walls of her world closing in on her. The meeting was brief but momentous. Mr. Okafor handed her the sealed envelope, and her hand shook as she tore it open. She could barely breathe as she scanned the results. The twins were indeed Chijioke's children, and Emeka was his son. The confirmation should have been a relief, a truth finally laid bare, but as Amora stared at the paper, something in her cracked. The truth, however painful, had been what she expected. What she hadn't expected was the sudden surge of guilt that threatened to swallow her whole. What if she had been wrong all along? What if, in her desperate attempt to make sense of the past, she had ignored the bigger picture? Amora had been so focused on the betrayal of Chijioke's secret family that she had failed to see the full picture, failed to understand what this revelation truly meant for Emeka, the son who had spent years on the streets, alone with the weight of his family's legacy. Back at the mansion, Emeka was nowhere to be found. He had disappeared after the phone call, slipping out of the house with no explanation, and Amora's concern deepened. She tried calling him several times, but each call went unanswered. She had given him space, she had let him figure out his place in her life, but now she couldn't help but feel that she had made a mistake. He was slipping away from her, just as he had from everyone else. Hours later, Amora found herself standing at the window of her study, staring out into the rain once again. The familiar sight of the storm, of the water cascading down in sheets, only deepened the tension in her heart. She could feel the heaviness of the truth settling into her bones, and it was suffocating. She was alone in her thoughts, wondering if this was where everything fell apart. Was this the moment when the fragile bond she had been trying to build with Emeka finally shattered? She heard the front door open, and her heart skipped a beat. She rushed to the hallway, where she saw Emeka standing at the entrance, his face drawn and tired. His eyes avoided hers as he stepped inside, dripping wet from the rain, his clothes soaked through. "Emeka," Amora called softly, her voice trembling with concern. He didn't answer immediately, just stood there, his shoulders hunched as if he were carrying the weight of the world. Then finally he met her gaze. The look in his eyes, dark and distant, sent a chill through her. "I know the truth, madam," Emeka said, his voice rough and low. "I know what you found out." Amora swallowed hard, her throat tight. "You didn't have to find out this way, Emeka," she said quietly, stepping toward him. "I wanted to tell you, but I didn't know how. It's not easy. The truth is that my father was Chijioke Okafor," Emeka interrupted bitterly. "The truth is that I've been living a lie all this time. I thought I was doing the right thing, taking care of my sisters, protecting them, being everything they needed, but I never had the chance to learn what it meant to be part of a family. And now, I find out that I'm just a part of his secret, A mistake he kept hidden from you and everyone else." His words stung, sharp and direct, and Amora felt the pain in them. It was the pain of someone who had been abandoned, someone who had lived for years without knowing who they truly were. "You are not a mistake, Emeka," Amora said, her voice breaking. "You're not, and neither are the twins. I've made mistakes too. But this family, I'm not trying to take anything from you, I'm just trying to help." But Emeka wasn't listening. His anger, his hurt was too deep. "You say you're trying to help," he snapped, his voice rising. "But all I see is a woman who wants to rewrite history. You want to pretend like this family, like everything, is the way it should have been. But it wasn't, madam. It wasn't." Amora stepped back, as though his words had physically pushed her away. He was right. She had been trying so hard to make everything right that she hadn't fully understood the depth of the wound Emeka was carrying. He had lost his mother, his father, his childhood, and now he was expected to fit into a family he had never known. For the first time, Amora realized that maybe, just maybe, she hadn't been as compassionate as she thought. She had focused so much on the children, on the truth, that she hadn't really looked at the broken boy standing in front of her. The one who had no place to go, the one who had been left out in the cold for too long. "I'm sorry," Amora whispered, the tears in her eyes threatening to spill. "I'm so sorry, Emeka. I should have known." Emeka turned away from her, his face hardening. "You don't know what it's like, madam. You'll never understand what it feels like to be nothing, to be a shadow in someone else's life." Before Amora could say anything else, he walked out of the house, leaving her standing there, her heart torn between the man she was trying to help and the truth that seemed to pull them further apart. The storm outside mirrored the one raging inside her. She had promised Emeka that they would be a family, but now, for the first time, Amora questioned whether that was even possible. Amora sat in the study, staring blankly at the now empty chair where Emeka had once sat. The house felt vast, hollow, as if every corner carried the weight of unsaid words and unhealed wounds. The storm that had raged outside seemed to reflect the one in her heart, and despite the calm that had descended, a deep sense of dread lingered. Emeka had left without a word. He had stormed out of the mansion, his departure as abrupt as his anger had been. And Amora couldn't stop herself from questioning everything. Could she have done more? Had she failed him? The pain she felt wasn't just for herself, it was for Emeka, for the boy who had been forced to carry the world on his shoulders, for the young man whose world had been shattered so many times that it was now beyond repair. She could feel it deep inside her, how far he had distanced himself, not just physically, but emotionally. And now, after all this time spent trying to piece together the broken parts of their relationship, Amora found herself wondering if she had misjudged everything. The phone on her desk buzzed, the sound snapping her from her thoughts. It was a text message from Mr. Okafor, the family lawyer. "The hearing is tomorrow. You need to be ready." A cold shiver ran through Amora as she read the message. The legal battle over Chijioke's estate had been brewing for days, and now it was finally going to come to a head. Chief Olamide had filed a lawsuit to declare Amora unfit to handle the estate and to challenge the legitimacy of Emeka's claim as the heir. She had tried to prepare herself for this, but now, with Emeka missing, the situation felt more dire than ever. The reality of it hit her hard. She wasn't just fighting for Emeka and the twins anymore. She was fighting for the future they all could share. A future that now seemed in jeopardy. But Emeka wasn't there. He was gone, lost in his own bitterness and anger. And Amora was left to face everything on her own. But was it truly on her own? The question lingered in the air, and a small part of her wondered if she had the strength to move forward without him. Would she continue this fight, even if it meant standing alone? She thought of Chijioke, of the man she had loved, the man who had left her with secrets she never wanted to uncover. She thought of the twins, innocent, fragile, and full of life, despite everything they had been through. And then she thought of Emeka, standing at the edge of the abyss, unable to step forward. In that moment, Amora realized that she had no choice but to stand firm. She couldn't back down now. She had promised them all a future, and she would be damned if she let it slip away. Not now. Not when she had the power to change their lives, to give them the life they deserved. She stood up abruptly, a newfound determination surging through her. She wasn't just fighting for the estate, she was fighting for Emeka's future, for the twins' future, and for her own redemption. She wasn't going to let everything they had built crumble. She needed to find Emeka, now more than ever. Amora moved quickly, her heels clicking sharply against the marble floors as she made her way to the door. She wouldn't allow herself to be swept away by doubt or fear. She would confront him, no matter how painful the conversation would be. She had to make him see that he wasn't alone in this, that he had a place here, with her, with the twins. She wasn't giving up on him. As she stepped outside, the rain began to fall again, light but steady. She didn't care. She was used to the storm by now. What mattered was that she was going to fight for her family. She got into her car and directed the driver to Emeka's last known location, the rundown neighborhood where he had lived before. Her heart pounded in her chest as they navigated through the streets of Lagos, the city she had grown accustomed to, yet always felt so far removed from. This was a world she had never truly known. But now it was a world she had to understand. She had to reach him. The car came to a stop in front of a small, weathered building. It looked run down, the paint chipped, and the windows dark. Amora's gaze flickered to the window of the top floor, where she could just make out the faint silhouette of a figure standing inside. It was Emeka. Her heart skipped a beat as she pushed the door open, stepping out into the wet street. She made her way to the building, the cold rain clinging to her skin as she approached the door. It wasn't locked. She turned the handle and walked inside. "Emeka," she called, her voice quiet but urgent. He appeared from the shadows, his figure standing tall in the dimly lit hallway. His face was drawn, his expression unreadable. But there was something in his eyes, something that told Amora he hadn't fully given up. "I came to talk," she said softly. "We need to talk, Emeka." He stood there for a moment, the silence stretching between them. Then slowly he nodded. "About what?" he asked, his voice hoarse. "About us," she said, her voice filled with conviction. "About your future, about the twins, about this family, about what comes next." Emeka's eyes darkened and his jaw tightened. "I can't do this, Amora. I can't just pretend everything is fine when it's not. I can't just accept that things can change. I'm not like you." Amora stepped forward, her voice steady but full of emotion. "You don't have to be like me. But you do have a place in this family. You're not alone, Emeka. I know it's hard to trust, but I'm not asking you to trust me all at once. I'm asking you to take a step, just one step forward." He looked at her for a long moment, his face a mixture of confusion and vulnerability. Finally he spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. "And what if I can't?" "Then I'll be here," Amora said simply. "I'll be here no matter what. You don't have to carry this alone anymore." For the first time since their confrontation, Emeka's walls seemed to crack, just a little. He stared at her for a long moment, the silence heavy between them. And then, slowly, he took a step forward. The final day had arrived, the day when everything would be revealed to the world. The press conference, the legal battle, the truth. All of it was coming to a head. Amora could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on her chest as she stood at the podium, the room full of reporters, cameras flashing, and voices murmuring around her. The truth she had fought so hard to uncover was now in her hands, and she had to make it count. The past few weeks had been a whirlwind. The discovery of Chijioke's secret family, the betrayal, the emotional struggles with Emeka and the twins. It had all led her to this point. She had been dragged into a world she never expected. A world of lies, betrayal, and family secrets. But through it all, Amora had kept one thing clear in her mind. She would not let her family, her new family, be torn apart by the past. Emeka had come around, though it hadn't been easy. His walls had come down, slowly but surely, as he realized that he wasn't alone anymore. The bond between them, though fragile at first, had strengthened. And as she looked across the room now, watching Emeka sit in the front row, holding the twins in his arms, Amora knew this fight wasn't just about Chijioke's estate anymore. It was about the future she had promised to build for the three of them. The press conference was her opportunity to take control of the narrative. She had already prepared herself for the questions, the accusations, and the scrutiny. But she was no longer the vulnerable widow who had been blindsided by her husband's secrets. She was a woman who had found a new sense of purpose, a new family to protect. Amora cleared her throat, her hand steady despite the nerves running through her. The reporters quieted as she began to speak. "Thank you all for coming today," she said, her voice calm but firm. "I stand before you today not just as the widow of Chijioke Okafor, but as a woman who has discovered a truth, one that has changed everything I thought I knew about love, family, and legacy." There was a murmur of surprise in the room, but Amora didn't pause. She was determined to be clear, to set the record straight. "It's been a difficult few weeks, and I know that many of you are here to learn more about the recent revelations regarding my late husband's secret family. I want to be open with you all," she continued, her eyes scanning the room. "The twins, Kamsi and Kene, and Emeka, his son, are family. They are my family." The reporters shifted, and she could feel the tension in the air. The story was unfolding in front of them, and Amora wasn't going to let them twist it. "Chijioke kept a part of his life hidden from me and from all of us. But the truth is clear now, and I won't deny it. These children are his. And Emeka, though he may have been forced to grow up alone, will now have the home and support he deserves." A few gasps rose from the crowd, and Amora saw the flash of cameras as the reporters scrambled to take notes. She had expected this. It wasn't easy for anyone to accept that a man like Chijioke, a man they all admired, had kept such a secret. "Despite the shock of this revelation," Amora continued, her voice unwavering, "I have decided to move forward with my family. I will be adopting Emeka and the twins, and I will make sure they have the future they deserve. I refuse to let the past define them. I will protect them, and I will fight for their place in this world." The room fell into an uneasy silence. Amora felt the eyes of the reporters on her, the weight of their judgment. But she stood tall, knowing that this was the right decision. She wasn't backing down. This was her family now, and no one would take them away from her. There was a slight shift in the room as the reporters digested her words. Amora could sense the change, the movement from shock to curiosity, and even a hint of respect. She wasn't just defending her husband's legacy. She was carving out a new one, a legacy built on truth, on love, and on family. But even as she spoke, Amora knew that the battle wasn't over. The real fight was about to begin. After the press conference, the legal proceedings would take their toll. Chief Olumide Okafor, Chijioke's elder brother, had made it clear that he wouldn't accept Emeka as the legitimate heir. He would challenge Amora's guardianship, and he would do everything in his power to wrest control of the estate from her hands. But Amora was ready. She had already gathered the evidence, the DNA test results, the letters, the testimony from those who had known Chijioke. She had the truth on her side, and she was prepared to stand her ground. The phone call came the next day, and Amora's hands trembled slightly as she picked it up. Mr. Okafor's voice was on the other end, his tone businesslike but laced with a sense of finality. "The court has ruled in your favor, madam. Chief Olumide's case has been dismissed. Emeka's claim as the legitimate heir stands. The estate is yours to manage as you see fit." Amora closed her eyes, a wave of relief washing over her. She had won. The estate, the future, and the family she had fought for, she had protected them. But there was still more to do. Emeka was still struggling with his own demons, still uncertain of his place in all of this. And Amora knew that her fight wasn't over. It was only just beginning. She found him later that evening, sitting alone in the garden, his gaze fixed on the horizon. The twins were asleep inside, and for the first time in days, he looked at peace. "Emeka," Amora called softly, approaching him. "It's over. The court has ruled in our favor. You're safe now. You and the twins." He turned to her, his eyes searching hers for the truth. "You really mean it, don't you?" he asked quietly. "I'm part of this family now." Amora nodded, her voice filled with conviction. "Yes, Emeka, you're part of this family, and we're going to make it work. Together." He smiled, just a little, and for the first time since she had met him, Amora saw the hope in his eyes. The walls he had built around himself were still there, but they were starting to crumble. "Thank you," he whispered. "Thank you for giving me a chance." Amora reached out, her hand gently resting on his shoulder. "We're family, Emeka, and I'll never let you go." As they stood together in the garden, the storm that had raged between them was finally over. The future was uncertain, but Amora knew one thing for sure: she had made the right choice. Family, no matter how it was formed, was worth fighting for, and Amora was ready to fight for hers. What lessons did you take from Amora and Emeka's journey? Share your thoughts in the comments. Your perspective might just help someone else see the transformative power of family, trust, and love. If stories like this resonate with you, be sure to follow our channel for more emotional, heart-touching journeys that remind us how embracing love and truth can change everything. Thank you for watching Amora and Emeka's story to the end. I hope it inspired your heart as much as it did theirs. We've got many more incredible stories waiting for you. You won't want to miss it.